Patch 3.6 is one that has been anticipated for a little while. It is the balance patch that we will be playing the Curious Journey seasonal tournament on, and it's coming with a rules update, some new cards, a lot of buffs, a couple of nerfs. My name is Boulevard for giantslayertv, and we're just going to dive right into it again. We're going to be going over the new cards first, then all of the buffs, and then all of the nerfs, and then we're going to go over the rules change and some of the cosmetics towards the end. But there's a lot to get over, so I'd rather just get into it with you. We've been introduced to 3 new cards yet again this patch, looking to shore up some weaknesses for Elites, Reputation, and Udyr. Might of the Vanguard is a slow speed spell that consumes all of your mana to summon a Dauntless Vanguard with the attack and health equal to the amount of mana that you spent, and then if you spend 9 or more mana, all of your other allied elites are granted +2/+2. Initially, it can be a little confusing to see a 3-mana card that spends all your mana when our other examples like Thermogenic Beam cost 0, but all it means is that you cannot cast this card for less than 3 mana. We're setting a minimum. As for the power level of this card, it's been quite some time since we've seen elites, but if we're using the old build as a baseline, the old build being Bannerman Harrowing, then I actually think I like this card a little bit. Elites usually want to curve out, but if they miss their curve because of an awkward hand, they don't have a whole lot to do with the remaining spell mana. Now, only time is going to tell how often you want to cast this for 9+ mana, but even looking outside of the intended use in Elites, this card is arguably better than Remembrance. On turn 3, you summon a 6/6 Vanguard, if you've played no other cards so far, which is only matched by Mountain Drake in the Remembrance pool. The flexibility of being able to go lower to the ground with it on a whim is appealing as well, as decks looking to play this are likely also going to include Vanguard Sergeant and might need to switch to a go wide plan on a moment's notice. Now, Remembrance doesn't see any play as it is, and hasn't for quite some time, so it's kind of a low-hanging fruit to say that this is better than Remembrance, but the flexibility of this might give it some staying power, as it's definitely going to be put in Day 1 decks. The question is, will it remain? And I think it could. For Reputation, we got 4 Glory, which is this slow-speed Noxus spell that starts at 6 mana and goes down to 3 when Reputation is active, which is activated by striking 4 or more times with units that have 5 or more attack. You get to summon 2 Trifarian Glory Seekers, which is the 2-mana 5/1 that can't block with Challenger, in case you forgot that one as well. It's been a while since it's seen play. Now, there are a few other buffs to Reputation sort of littered throughout the patch, but ultimately, the main problem with Reputation-focused decks, specifically LeBlanc's Sivir, has always been that there's just a lot of low-health units, 5/1s, 5/2s, 6/3s, they're littered throughout the deck, and the deck also doesn't have a lot of mana to waste, given that some of the stickier units are going to be higher in cost, and even your combat tricks like Whirling Death and Bloody Business are a little bit more expensive than you really want them to be. So while this card is good at 3 mana, I'm not sure that it's the best payoff that a Reputation deck can fit in, or even a Frostbite mid-range deck just looking to have a little bit more oomph in the mid-game. Maybe it finds a home somewhere, but at the moment, I just cannot see one. Enough is changing about Udyr this patch that we kind of have to throw everything we knew about him before out the window, which is fine because we didn't really know much to begin with, but I'll talk more about that when we actually get to the Udyr changes. For Inner Beast specifically, this 2-mana burst speed Freljord spell that gives an ally +1/+1 and then creates a stance swap in hand, we may be looking at one of my least favorite kinds of cards, which is the sort of necessary evil to make an archetype work. It's unknown exactly how many stance swap cards are going to be ideal for your deck, but there aren't too many that exist currently. If the play ends up being to just jam as many stances as possible and make a 12/12 Udyr, yeah, maybe you get stuck playing Inner Beast, but I'm not expecting too much from this spell specifically. It is give, not grant, meaning it is just a temporary buff, so for 2 mana, not a very good spell, and ultimately, I think that anybody that is playing this definitely wants to cut it, but just might not be able to if this is how you have to make Udyr function. Now for the exciting bit, champion buffs. Now, a lot of these are pretty minor. They don't change the way that any of the decks are built or played per se, they're just nice quality of life changes to try and adjust for power creep. Except for Darius. Darius's change is strictly for Path of Champions, where he has to see a half health nexus rather than a 10 health nexus, meaning that if your opponent starts with 40 health in the Path of Champions game mode, you only need to get them down to 20 instead of 10 before your Darius levels. It will not impact constructed play Darius in any way, shape, or form. Sorry, everyone. Now, Ashe is changing so that instead of frostbiting enemies, you just have to get them down to 0 power. Now, hopefully this still triggers on negative power, as that is a thing in Legends of Runeterra, but the main point here is that aggressively using Troll Chant will help you turbo level your Ashe. They do specifically call out that this should help Ashe make better use of your second region to level her, but that really only applies to Shurima with any level of consistency thanks to cards like Exhaust, Desert Duel, and Quicksand. That's the only one that I can think of working in a practical sense, as Nocturne and Ash doesn't really sound like anything to me, and it's unknown at present if silencing a 0 attack unit that has had its power increased counts as reducing its power to 0. But again, that is not something that is consistent, something that you wouldn't really build a deck around, so maybe Ash Shurima is a direction that they're trying to push us as more Shurima reputation cards come out. Ash has 5 attack, maybe that's where we're going with this, but only time will tell. For the most part, though, this really does just kind of impact Troll Chant. Galio is getting an additional health when he levels up because most champions get an additional power and health, but since Galio has Formidable, doesn't care about that power stat, will be moving from a 0.8 to a 0.10 now when going from level 1 to level 2. Moving on, Garen will now offer his other allies +1/+1 the turn that he comes into play on both his level 1 and level 2 side. Now we've got a good idea of how strong this ability is thanks to Genevieve Elmhart, and boy is it a doozy sometimes. Now champions like Garen who have previously had no immediate impact on the board have been pushed out pretty hard by the power creep of Legends of Runeterra, which is turning 2 this patch. So it's nice to see the thematic tie-in that is relevant to Demasia's play pattern, not overtly powerful since it's not Grant, and ties in lore-wise since he's inspiring those around him into action. It also makes playing level 2 Garen on your non-attack turn feel less awkward as you significantly bolster your defensive capabilities not only by buffing up your board, but by playing a 6/6 regeneration unit. That said, I can't comment on how strong this does or does not make Garen, as we're likely building whatever deck he fits into from the ground up, not slotting him into something existing. And again, it has been a long time since elites were viable, and with the large number of changes, it's hard to tell if Riot has been too soft-handed or not. Moving out of Demacia and into the realm of magic, we have Karma and Katarina. Now, they both will retain their level 1 ability on their level 2 side, meaning Katarina will come down and make a fleeting Blade's Edge every time she's summoned, and Karma will continue to generate a random spell from your regions at every round end. This means in the late game, Katarina is giving you a Mystic Shot alongside your 2 rallies, and Karma no longer has a potential issue of running out of gas. LeBlanc will now gain a mirror image when she levels up, as well as for every 15 damage she sees you deal once she has leveled, which is absolutely massive, cutting the requirements for mirror image totally in half from 30 down to 15. There's a few cool combos you can do with mirror image, the most prominent one being looping it with Incisive Tactician, and it should be significantly easier to smoothly curve into something like that for LeBlanc decks. Leona is getting back Overwhelm. Yes, I said back. For those of you that don't know the story, last year there was a patch where level 2 Leona was silently updated to have Overwhelm. It was something Riot was testing internally, it was not in the patch notes, but it was shipped to live for a few hours before they caught the mistake and took it down. And people seem to really like it. You know, as the Daybreak archetype is very susceptible to chump blocking since you're stunning your opponent's largest units, and none of the Daybreak cards inherently have any evasive keywords, and Zenith Blade has always felt a little bit weird within the archetype since there are so many more important cards to play first in the turn if Ravun is not on field. So overall, I think players are very excited to get this back, as Leona has never really made any waves. Malphite will now stun an enemy when you play him on both his level 1 and 2 side, because we couldn't go through a champion update patch without giving people hope that Yasuo was playable again. Nasus is getting back Fearsome on his level 1 side, which is flavorful because it scares me a little, and Nocturne's level 2 wording is changing. He will now give the enemy board -1 power each time you summon a unit rather than each time you play a unit, meaning things like House Spider will now give -2 attack instead of -1. Now I went through all the Nightfall cards, and the only ones that summon a unit is Crescendum, which is a Nightfall card because Aphelios is a Nightfall card. But Crescendum and Golden Sister off of Lunari Priestess are the only examples I found for this effect within the Nightfall cards themselves, leading me to believe it's not going to be very impactful. Scion is getting back 1 attack on his level 1, 2, and return form, which it will put him at 9 power, which is still a nerf state compared to his on-release, but I think we're going to be okay with that. And then Udyr's level up condition is changing from damaging the enemy nexus 7 times to playing 3 stance swaps. He's also getting an additional power on both his level 1 and 2 side. Now, it's still going to be impossible to throw down a leveled Udyr on turn 4, but with the help of something like Shaman's Call, it should be relatively easy to get him down on leveled on, let's say, turn 6, right? I know it sounds kind of late, but a level 1 Udyr is a 5/4, while a level 2 Udyr is a 9/8 at minimum, since you need to play 3 stance swaps to level him, and he gains +1/+1 for each stance swap you have played this game. And then to round out your champion buffs, Vladimir will be gaining Fearsome on his level 1 and level 2 side, as the lack of regeneration on his level 1 side made him a little too easy to chip down. I sped through some of those changes because I didn't want to repeat myself too many times, so here's my general sentiment. A lot of these changes were pretty impactful, and they were done to cards that may as well have not existed from a competitive standpoint. Therefore, it's impossible to know what this is going to do to the meta, as a lot of these champions either don't have a framework to go off of, or the one that they did have is severely outdated. If your goal is to top the upcoming seasonal tournament, you're probably not going to have time to experiment with all of these champions, but you can pick your favorite 2 or 3, give it the old college try. If you're looking to enter the seasonal tournament and haven't hit Masters yet, the latter is likely going to be the most volatile it's ever been for the first few days. Queue up your favorite aggro deck and shoot for the moon. Now, if I had to pick the 3 most impactful champion changes that we got in this patch, just to give you a starting point in case you're totally out of your depth. First, I'd pick Scion, because even 8-attack Scion has not been absent from tournament success as of late. I'd pick LeBlanc, because I cannot overstate how important it is that the requirement for the first mirror image went from 30 damage to 15, and Udyr. With Udyr getting a much more streamlined game plan, you have a lot more room to add a region to protect and facilitate that game plan, instead of needing to add in a lot of fluff to level Udyr that does not synergize with level 2 Udyr. Now, I'd like to give an honorable mention to Karma and Leona, who I think just don't fit this meta specifically, but did have cool changes, and to Malphite, who I think had the change, who caught me off guard the most, but was one of my favorites. Not for any Yasuo-related reasons. Wink. I know I say wink, but I was actually being serious. Wink. And I know what you're thinking. Boulevard, what about Nasus? Does Nasus getting back Fearsome mean nothing to you? Well, in patch 2.11, when Nasus was changed to lose Fearsome, they also changed Dunekeeper from a 2-1 to a 1-2, and Escaped Abomination from a 4-3 to a 4-2, and Stalking Shadows from 2 mana to 3 mana. And I'm just not totally convinced that Nasus getting back Fearsome is enough to bring him back. I know, that was a lot of buffs to get through. Are you ready to get into the nerfs? Because I'm not. There's more buffs to get through that aren't just pertaining to champions. First of all, Blood for Blood is moving from fast speed to burst speed to bring it more in line with a similar effect like iterative improvement. Callous Bone Crusher, the 4-mana 6/4 Shurima unit that cost 2 when Reputation was active, will now cost 3 when Reputation was active, but will also gain Overwhelm on summon. And then rounding out all of the Udyr buffs, we have Hiara Allseer, the 6-mana 5/5. It's changing so that instead of creating a stance swap on summon and having that cost 0 until the end of round, it will now create a stance swap on summon, but each turn, the first stance swap you play will cost 0. Now, even with this buff, I feel like this is probably the second worst stance swap generator, but again, we very well might end up in a situation where it is optimal to play all but the worst or even all of the stance swap generation cards. So really only time is going to tell. We're going to have a lot of Udyr builds coming at us fast and hard. Gotta just kind of weed through the mud on this one. Swiftwing Lancer, the 5/4 for 5 Demacia Challenger that creates a random elite when it dies, is now an elite itself. It's worth reminding you that a few patches back a change was made so that cards cannot randomly generate themselves, but gaining the elite tag does make this the premier top-end challenger for those decks, if that's something they even want. Honestly, a better buff may have just been removing Border Lookout from the elite pool. And to finalize the buffs, the last one, I promise, Vanguard Squire. The 4-mana 3/3 who costs 1 less for each elite you've summoned is going down from a starting mana of 4 to a starting mana of 3. Again, been a very long time since we've seen elites, and so long that I don't have a judgment call here. She wasn't played in the old elite builds, and I think some of the newer cards still need to get slotted in, like Petricite Broadwing, even though it's not an elite, and I don't think elites end up being a pile of every unit with the tag, which is probably what it would take for Vanguard Squire to be included. Okay, I'm done messing with you. We're actually into the nerfs now. There were no champions, so we are straight into followers, landmarks, and spells, starting with Ambush, which has been a prevalent win condition in a number of Voltron-like strategies, such as Lee Sin Victor, Riven Victor, Vi Victor. I think you get who the culprit is here. Now, it's going up from 2 to 3 mana, since it was a little bit too easy to meet the condition for elusive, but overall I think the strategies are still pretty sound. Ballistic Bot is also losing his 1 power, going from a 1/3 to a 0/3, as it was a little too common for Ballistic Bot to come down on 2 and sort of turn off your opponent's aggression for that turn and then start to ramp himself into the late game. Now, he's still a great ambush threat later on. He's still an Ignition Factory. He just doesn't get to kill a unit as freely in the early game anymore. When this card was revealed, I always shuddered at the thought of having to say these words out loud, but Buried Sun Disk has been nerfed. Your Ascended Champions leveling up will only accelerate the countdown by 9 instead of 10, making it so that the earliest you can ascend by only leveling Xerath and Azir is turn 8. Turn 6 Ascensions were a lot more common than they probably should have been, and at that point, it's nearly impossible for most decks to deal with not only the 6/6 Azir and the 5/9 Xerath that are obliterating your board, but also with the powerful Emperor's deck. Shifting this back by 2 turns at least should give a little more mid-game power to those looking to fight against the Sands of Shurima, or at the very least make the builds a little more awkward by needing to cut down on utility for more countdown acceleration. Now we get to easily my least favorite change, the Bandle Tree. Moving from 5 mana to 4, the Bandle Tree must now be in play and see you summon all 10 regions in order to win the game. I'm not going to sit here and walk you through all the implications of this, the change in play style, all that, but a sentiment I think a lot of people can agree on is that if your first Bandle Tree dies, that win condition is very likely no longer viable for that game. Normally a card like this should probably only cost about 2 mana, but it does still give you a unit every turn, which might be the effect that future decks utilize it for more than actually playing it for the win condition. At this rate, it's a cheaper and much worse Howling Abyss, which is also not nearly as exciting or interesting as Howling Abyss. So if you were hoping Bandle Tree would be deleted from the game, I dare say you got your wish. And to round out the short list of nerfs, Yordles in Arms has been reduced from giving +4/+4 when 4 regions were played to +3/+3. Pretty straightforward, not much to say there, and it does also unfortunately nerf the second most prominent win condition the more recent Bandle Tree decks have picked up on. Now, on top of the buffs and nerfs of patch 3.6, we have a game rule updates, 2 of them actually. Now, if you want to pause and read this, you can, but the gist of what's going on here is, number 1, you can no longer burst pass. Now, if you don't know what burst passing is, you used to be able to play a burst speed spell, pass to your opponent. If they passed back, you could either continue on your turn like normal, or you could pass back to end the turn. Now, when you play a burst speed spell and pass, your opponent can choose to end the turn. Now, there were some interesting implications at high-level play for burst passing, but more often than not either did or probably should have led to just empty and unnecessary pass-back situations like Ruben Zoo called out here. Number 2 is that cast is merging with play, a very important distinction that in all fairness could be a little confusing even for experienced Legends of Runeterra players when trying to determine how things were going to resolve. Previously, play effects triggered as soon as a spell went onto the stack, while cast effects had to wait until the spell resolved. Now, all effects that were previously cast will function as play, meaning they will, across the board, these abilities will trigger when a spell is put onto the stack, not when the spell resolves. Additionally, targeting now also happens as soon as the spell or ability is applied to the stack. As they said, there are 61 cards that need to be adjusted, so I can't go into detail on all of them, but Lux, Heimerdinger, and Ezreal seem to be the biggest winners as the level of counterplay that previously existed no longer does. It can be a little confusing, I know, so to give you a practical application, let's say I control Lux. Previously, if I cast For Demacia, and in response you cast Vengeance on my Lux would die, For Demacia would resolve, that would be the end of it. Now, I cast For Demacia, my Lux levels up, I get a Final Spark, and now if you want to, you may cast your Vengeance targeting my Lux. The kill the champion before they see the spell resolve counterplay is gone. Ezreal gets more out of this than anybody. Previously, if I were to play Mystic Shot and target your unit, and you were to play Glimpse Beyond to kill it yourself, my Mystic Shot's target would be gone, and when it was its turn to resolve, it would fizzle, the targeting would fizzle, my Ezreal would gain no level up progression. Now, that level up progression is locked in as soon as I line up my Mystic Shot and hit the OK button, taking away the counterplay from you to slow down my level up. Additionally, if my Ezreal is at 5 out of 6 towards his level up progression, and I play a spell onto one of your units, you can no longer kill my 3 health Ezreal before the spell resolves, Ezreal levels up, and I get that 4th health point. Now he will immediately go to 4 health. Additionally, and possibly most important of all, let's say in this scenario you have a damaged unit, and I control a leveled Ezreal. Previously, if I were to line up 3 Ravenous Flock and 2 Scorched Earth onto that unit, the Scorched Earth would resolve, kill the unit, you would take 4 damage, or 2 damage rather, and all 4 other spells would fizzle. Now, as soon as I hit that OK button, you are instantly taking 10 damage because I have targeted your unit with 5 different spells, even though 4 of them are not going to resolve. Even if you heal your unit to full so that none of them resolve, you have already taken that 10 damage before you get a chance to play a card in response. Now, admittedly, Ezreal's been a shadow of his former self for quite some time, and building an Ezreal combo deck has been a downright laughable idea for quite some time. But now, with the rules change in the same patch as a Karma buff, I don't know. I'm not sure if I do or do not like this rules change so far. Obviously, on the one hand, there's less counterplay, which always feels a little weird to be like, yes, I love it when there's less counterplay. But on the other hand, your champions are going to feel more rewarding, especially Lux and Heimerdinger, ones that aren't necessarily seeing a lot of play. And even Ezreal, who's just been relegated to this Tri-Beam control deck for the better part of a year, will maybe finally get some time in the sun again as an actual combo champion without needing to rebuff him to, you know, the 2 damage all the time or any of those other reverts that we could have made on Ezreal. Now, a line that they made here that really stuck out to me is clean up the space for new mechanics in reference to why they're making this cast versus play sort of conglomeration rather than keeping them separate. When you have minor yet important distinctions like this, it can be a pain to balance new cards in the future, as it's a very time-consuming process to go through and look over your existing card pool to see if there's anything that breaks it if it's one way versus the other, and if you ship it in the wrong state, you can have a disaster on your hands for something that may have been easily slipping through the cracks. But let's finish it up there and move into the next portion, the visual UX updates. Similar to the blue cracks that we got in the previous patch, we now have things like stack clarity, which is going to make it more obvious who is the player that kicked off the current stack, attack and blocker indicators to make it just more obvious who is attacking and who is blocking, because when someone rallies, sometimes it's hard to remember. We have turn gems, which are going to seek to improve clarity on whether your action will pass to your opponent or end the turn, which will hopefully stop a few players from going back to muscle memory and burst passing and screwing up their games in the first few days of the patch, as well as indicators for attackers who will hit the nexus and a more clear symbol on when an attack is ghost blocked. Now, as a caster, I'm a big fan of changes like this, as they make it a lot easier for me and other spectators to keep track of what's going on, or quickly make sense of what's going on in a game that we hopped into in the middle of a turn without detracting from the player experience too much. And to round things out, we have, I'm sure somebody's favorite part of the patch, the new cosmetics. We have Arcane Vi and Arcane Jinx joining the skin roster, new splash arts for both of their level 1 and 2, no unique animations, but we are getting some updates to existing epic tier skins in the form of unique champion spell card arts. We have Battle Academia Lux, Cosmic Zephyr Yasuo, Darkstar Zed, Gilded Vi, Pool Party Talia, Santa Braum, Sentinel Aurelia, Worldbreaker Trundle, and then axes for Pool Party and Ruined Draven. This patch, Pool Party Draven will be getting unique animations for when the axe is played, and Ruined Draven will be getting unique animations for that starting next patch, patch 3.7. Then we get into a very iconic Vi emote from Arcane, See This Look, Time to Shut Up, and then some card backs. It is the 2-year anniversary of Legends of Runeterra, so we get the Turning 2 card back, where Chip is popping out of a cake, which you can also get in icon form alongside the City of Progress to match with the Arcane skins. And that is going to do it for this absolute behemoth of a patch, patch 3.6. Now, there's so many things I want to know your thoughts on. What was your favorite champion update? You know, what are you hopping onto the ladder first? I already gave you mine. I want to hear about yours. I want to hear about, is there a nerf that you thought slipped through the cracks? Because there weren't a lot of nerfs. What do you think of this new rules update? I'm curious. I want to know. If you made it this far, please like the video, ring the little bell icon, get notified when we put up new videos, subscribe to the giantslayerlor YouTube channel, and please, please let me know your thoughts on this patch in the comments below. Again, I have been Boulevard for giantslayertv. Thank you so much.